too much longer. For those of you who were on time, we appreciate you being here. Johnny on the spot, 11:30 this morning. So welcome to the annual West Slope Livestock and Forage Grower Update. We've been doing this for a number of years after having done a in-person presentation at the Loma stockyards there for a number of years. We moved online and are so glad that we've got people from all over the West Slope and even outside of the West Slope and in Colorado joining us today. This workshop is presented to you by CSU Extension, primarily the West Slope agents on the West Slope of Colorado have brought you this presentation today. Like special thanks to Retta Brugger, our West Slope regional range specialist, Emily Lockard, who is our extension director and ag agent in Montezuma County, Gus Westerman, ag agent and extension director in Dolores County, Hannah Kirsting from Gunnison County. Thank you, Hannah. Hannah is fairly new to extension, was jumped right in and helped us a great deal with this. Our friend Jenny Byerman, who you'll get to meet soon, our ag economist for the West Slope. Megan Stetson, who is our agent and director in Moffat County. Robin Young, extension director and natural resources agent in Archuleta County. Sydney Pryor, who's our director and agent in Jackson County. And then myself, I'm Todd Hagbu, joining you from Routt County. So thanks again for being with us today. And welcome to the first day. Note that we've also got another presentation for you coming up on Thursday. So a couple things before we start today. Note that, of course, we are video conferencing. We've all been doing this long enough to know that there can be challenges. It's wonderful when everything works, but sometimes everything doesn't work quite, right? If you do have bad connection, as noted earlier, we will send you a recording link if you've registered for this webinar. So if you've missed out on something, don't worry, you can watch it again later. Turning off your camera can help. And note that we have disabled camera and audio for the most part. Speakers will try to be careful with that bandwidth as well. There's just too many people to have everybody with their voices being able to be recorded and their camera on. So this is a webinar platform. Note that you should have a Q&A feature on your screen. If you have questions for our presenters today, please note those in the Q&A. And if our presenter misses that, Retta and I will try to make sure that all questions are answered. Note too that of course, you're probably at your office, at home. Maybe you've just come in from feeding and you're getting ready to have lunch. Please try not to be very distracted, because then that means that you'll probably ask a question that's already been answered. So try to pay attention as best you can. But again, if you do have a question, put it in that Q&A box on your Zoom tab link there. If you're somewhere other than West Slope, welcome. We are so glad to have you join us, but do understand that this was curated in particular for West Slope residents. And so some of the presentations today will be specific to the West Slope. If you have a question and you're not from the West Slope, even if you are from the West Slope, let us know where you're at, because the weather conditions, and we're going to be talking about weather today, might be talking about markets, things of that nature. What we're experiencing in Routt County might be very different from Montezuma County, might be very different from Lincoln County. So let us know your location. If you do need closed captioning today, email Retta at retta.brugger@colostate.edu, and note that we are an equal access university, and we want to make sure that everyone has access to this presentation, regardless of any other things that may be getting in your way, whether it's visual impairment, sight or language, anything of that nature. Please let us know. If you need translation services, sign language interpretation, etc., give everyone a moment to read that information, and then we will move on. Last thing I'd like to note today, that should we have any technical issues or get Zoom bombed, pay attention to your email very closely. You will receive a new link through Zoom, primarily from Retta is how that should come. That will have a new link to a webinar that we will get restarted right away should the system crash on us for any reason. But again, welcome today. So pleased to have you. And then we're going to jump into our presentations. In the first introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Ag Business Management Specialist Jenny Byerman for that introduction. Jenny?
Thank you very much, Todd. Becky, I'll read your bio quickly while I have you pull up your presentation. So our first speaker today is Dr. Becky Bolinger. She's the Assistant State Climatologist at the Colorado Climate Center with Colorado State University. Her interests include climate variability, climate trends, climate prediction, the hydrologic cycle, water resources, and climate and drought monitoring. She's worked for 3 different climate centers, has experience with many different climate data sets, and has experience with research and applications in climate. Her expertise and passion is bridging the gap between climate research and decision-making applications. Thanks so much for being here today with us, Becky. With that, it looks like your slides are ready to go, so I will turn it over to you for our weather outlook.
Great. Thank you, Jenny. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you wonderfully.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Thank you for inviting me to be on this again. Always great to be able to connect with you all and provide a little bit of a look at where we've been so far this season and where we're going from here. So this will be a statewide look at a lot of these maps, but in some cases, I'm hoping to focus on different West Slope areas. But if you want specifics, please feel free to follow up with me because we do have area specific things that I can help you with if you want. So I'm going to start with where we are now, looking at temperature and precipitation, where our snowpack is and where we are with drought currently. So we always start by talking about the water year, and the water year starts October 1st and ends September 30th. So we are now in water year 2024. And this is a look at where we've been for the October through January period. So we've got a 4-month time period. On the left is a map of Colorado showing our temperature rankings. And on the right is the map showing the precipitation rankings. So focusing in on the left is a map with the temperature rankings. Again, this is out of 129 years of data from NOAA. And if there were blue, that would be areas that in the last 4 months have ranked colder. We don't have any of those areas for October through January of this year. We do have most of the state ranked in those warmer categories. So aside from a couple of white spots, the majority of the state has ranked in the top 35 years of warmest October through January's. And that darkest red color, which is a significant percentage of the state, particularly the West Slope, we have the top 10 warmest October through January on record. And so that's where our statewide rank is. If we combine that all for the state, it's the 10th warmest October through January period in 129 years. Looking over at the right side with the precipitation, it's been a little bit more of a mixed bag. The white, again, is that middle ranking, which covers a significant portion of the state. We do have a couple of small wetter pockets in Southeast Colorado wetter rank, but where you see those browns are those drier ranks, which we see when we look at the San Luis Valley and west into the San Juan Mountains, the Four Corners, and up along the West Slope there and into Northwest Colorado, areas that have ranked in the 35 driest years, and a couple even a little bit more drier there in like particularly Gunnison County. This is what we've seen for February so far. So this map shows basically from February 1st to February 18th, which was Sunday, how much precipitation have we accumulated across the state. And it's been a very active February. We've had quite a bit of moisture coming to us from these atmospheric rivers you might have heard about in the news that inundate into California, bringing flooding and excess moisture. We also get the benefit from that. So where we have those blues are areas that have gotten, at least around an inch of moisture. Large areas of Western Colorado have gotten 1.5 to 3 inches of moisture. These bits of red that show up in the highest elevation show 4 to 5 inches of moisture that has accumulated since the beginning of the month. So when we look, some of these areas still pop up as a little bit drier than average, particularly around Grand Junction. That 0.36 inches is a little bit below average. But in our highest elevations and the majority of the area, we're seeing above average precipitation for February, which helps to cut into those deficits that we've seen earlier in the water year. These have been the temperatures that we've experienced over the last 30 days. And so this is after we had a pretty huge cold snap for the state in mid-January. Since then, we've returned to those very mild conditions. So that's something that continues from the October through January time period. That darkest red color that covers most of the state is 4 degrees above average for the last 30 days. And so most of the state has been much warmer than what we typically experience this time of year. It's a current look statewide of snowpack. It's not often you see this map showing all green everywhere, which is in that near normal range. So this was as of February 16th, but what we're looking at here along the west slope is right near average, with the lowest in the southwest, the San Juan Mountains and surrounding areas at 96% of average snowpack to date. But this is, again, thanks to some big boosts in moisture we've had in February. And here's a look at our current drought situation. So currently standing 63% of the state is not in any drought category. The yellow represents not a drought category, but dry. So that's kind of your indicator that things are getting drier or that you're coming out of drought. And so that covers most of Western Colorado, with the exception of a few of the mountain spots that have gotten decent moisture. So we do have quite a bit of D0, and we still do have some lingering D1, which is moderate drought categories, particularly over the San Juans, the Colorado River Valley before it exits into Utah, and a little bit into North Park and the San Luis Valley is where our driest spots are. But based on the precipitation that we've had in the last week, you can expect that this map will be further updated with more improvements this week. And this is the level of improvement that we've seen over the past 4 weeks. So basically, according to the U.S. Drought Monitor, if you compared the January 16th U.S. Drought Monitor map with the February 13th U.S. Drought Monitor map from last week, where have we seen changes? If we saw any areas getting drier, we'd see those yellows, oranges, and browns. But everywhere where we see changes, it's green, and those are areas that have seen improvements in drought depiction since mid-January, which is, most of Southwest Colorado has seen some improvement thanks to the February moisture. Switching gears and going into the spring outlook, we're going to look ahead at our temperature and precipitation outlooks. We'll do a brief look at snowpack projections and also talk a little bit about El Nino. So one of the first products I'd like to show is where are we looking at for the next 7 days. And this is on our drought page, or the link in the bottom left. You can follow that. The upper left map shows the total amount of precipitation accumulations that we can expect from this Tuesday morning through next Tuesday morning. And so it looks like the higher elevations west of the divide are going to continue to see some precipitation activity, more snows. For the southern part of the state, the San Juan Mountains, it's looking to be more in line with about 3/4 of an inch to 1.5 inches over the next week. And then as we go into the northern mountains, a little bit higher, 1 inch to 2 inches of moisture over the next week. If you look at the map on the lower right-hand corner, that shows how that compares to average. So what accumulation do we get in a typical week, and how does this week compare? So the greens show basically that this precipitation over the next week is going to be above average, particularly northwest Colorado, around the Moffat County, Routt County, Rio Blanco, Garfield areas. This is going to be good to keep that moisture going. As you move further south, it's going to be a little bit more hit and miss. Areas not getting as much. When they do get it, it might not be quite enough to keep up with average. But overall, not too bad of a week in terms of the precipitation forecast. Extending out to the 8 to 14 day outlook, this is from the Climate Prediction Center, and it shows what we can expect for this one for February 27th through March 4th. So as we end February and start March, the left-hand map shows what the temperature outlook is, and the right is the precipitation outlook. So on the left, when we look at the temperature outlook, areas that are in blue are more likely to be below average temperatures, and areas in red are more likely to be above average in temperatures. So what we're seeing here is a pretty dominant ridge, high pressure, warm air over the eastern half of the country. And then as we move west of the divide, we're going to see more of that trough activity. And so what it shows for western Colorado is that gray basically means we can expect more seasonal temperatures. So what do we typically see at the end of February and beginning of March? No extreme cold, not unnecessarily warm, but a lot more seasonal can be expected at the end of the month. On the right side, the precipitation outlook indicates if there's brown, it's more likely to be below average precipitation, and green is more likely to be above average precipitation. One of the interesting patterns that I wanted to point out here is that this is actually a pretty La Nina pattern. This is the kind of thing you would expect during a La Nina, with wet in the south, or wet in the Pacific Northwest and Great Lakes, and dry in the south. And that is, we are not in a La Nina right now. So this is kind of that indicator that we don't always follow those patterns that we tend to think of when we are in an El Nino or a La Nina. So what this shows for Colorado is most likely we're going to be near normal precipitation, which means we should expect to see continued snow activity in the higher elevations. Lower elevations probably a little bit drier, just given the time of year. And there is a slight leaning towards above average precipitation as you go further north in the state. Climate Prediction Center also released last week their seasonal temperature outlooks. So these are for the March, April, May time period. So going into the spring, what can we expect? On the left, we're looking at temperature again, and equal chances is the white, which means basically it's anybody's guess. They are not getting much indication from the climate models that are telling them whether we're going to have above average, below average, or near average temperatures. And I think that this is largely because we've had a lot of variability in our springs. And so it's difficult for the models to really identify, based on past springs, based on our warmer climate, what can we expect? There's still just a lot of variables that could come into play. And so I take that to generally mean that, we could still have some big snow events, fairly cold events, but then continuing with these mild breaks in between. And this is where the temperature outlook is following an El Nino pattern, where we're looking at warmer temperatures likely in the Pacific Northwest and Great Lakes. Looking at the precipitation outlook on the right side, it's again equal chances, which means we don't have a lot of indication of what's going to happen just based on the climate models going into spring. So in this case, I took the San Juan Basin to do a snowpack projection. And the reason I took the San Juan Basin is because it's lower than the other basins. So if you look at the Gunnison, the Colorado Headwaters, or the Yampa White Basins, the black line is very near average. So in this sample with the San Juan Basin, the black line is a little bit below average. And this shows how the snowpack has accumulated since October 1st. So if you follow the black line, snowpack accumulation started right before November, and you see this basically it's like a step function where you flatten out, you're not getting any activity, and then you get a snow event that steps you up higher. And so earlier in the water year, we were a lot below average, which is the green line. So you want to follow along with the green line to stay near average. But as you can see, as we got into February, we've had a couple of big steps. So, early last week, we were looking at close to average snowpack accumulation, but we flattened out a little bit since then, which is why it shows up today as 94% of average. We still have 41 days until we typically reach peak, which is early April. And all these little colored lines that come off the black line are looking at the future compared to if we started now and everything that happened in history, what are our different scenarios from here? And basically what it shows is that we still have the opportunity for above average snowpack. We also still have the opportunity for below average snowpack. If you follow along with the middle line, which is if we followed along right at average, we would end this snowpack season with a peak that would be a little bit below average. So in order to get to a normal peak, we want to see some above average accumulations happening over those next 41 days. So I mentioned the El Nino. What is the ENSO forecast? I'm really just going to focus on the graph on the left, which tells us basically from the models, what can we expect going through 3-month time periods. So this is starting with the January, February, March. The red bar is that we are in an El Nino. As we go forward, what is the chance that we stay in an El Nino would be the red bar. If we went into a La Nina would be the blue bar, and the gray is neutral, so neither El Nino nor La Nina. So as we head into spring, we can see there's still about a 75% chance that we're going to stay in the El Nino, but that El Nino will be weakening by the time we get to early summer. It's more likely we'll be in this neutral category. And then as we get into late summer and into the fall time period here at the end, it's looking more likely that we'll go back to a La Nina. So we are still in El Nino. What does that mean for our spring? This is from our Climate Change in Colorado report, where we looked at the relationship between Colorado precipitation and El Nino and La Nina. So I want you to focus in on the map on the upper right, which is for the March, April, May time period. These are areas in red that tend to be wetter during an El Nino. So if we're looking along the west slope, kind of along the divide and east to the Front Range, these are the areas that tend to get more moisture during an El Nino in the spring. So areas in white, there's not really an indication one way or the other. Kind of a different way of looking at it is the risk of wet or dry extremes. So this is a product from NOAA. The link is down there where we're looking at the spring during an El Nino. What is the risk of getting a wet or a dry extreme? Areas in red are more at risk for dry extremes. So in the northern part of the country, around the Mississippi Valley, Ohio Valley, those are areas that I would look for typically in an El Nino spring that they might have some drought development. For Colorado, there's actually more of a risk of wet extremes, particularly as you go further south in the state. But really, I like to take this as meaning there's low risk for drought development during a spring El Nino. These maps from climate.gov show what snowfall typically happens during El Nino winters. So the upper map is during strong El Ninos, the lower map is all El Ninos. And basically, when we look at El Nino winters and snow accumulations, the brown, which you see over the northern and central mountains, tend to get less snow during an El Nino. And then the blues, which would be the San Juan Mountains, the Sangre de Cristos into the Eastern Plains, tend to get more snow during an El Nino winter. Obviously, that hasn't panned out for this winter. The northern basins are doing fine right now, which is good news, but maybe an indication of what we can expect as we continue our snow season into the spring. I wanted to do just a very brief snapshot further into the future to kind of look at climate change signals and what they're showing us for long term. So this is a map showing the warming that we have observed from 1980 through 2022. And we've divided the state up into 11 different divisions. So you can pick whichever division you live in and are particularly interested in. Overall, you're going to see that warming has occurred in all these divisions, with the most significant warming occurring in the southwest and southern portions of the state. This breaks down those divisions basically into little squares, but also breaks it down by season. And the reason I wanted to show this is to show what seasons we're seeing the most significant warming. DJF, the winter, is not showing a lot of as much warming. Same with the spring, depending on where you are. If you're in the southwest portion of the state, you are still seeing significant warming in the spring. Overall, though, the most significant warming that we are experiencing has been in the fall months. Precipitation, not as clear. Overall, we've seen a bit drier when we look at the 21st century versus the last half of the 20th century. But there's not a clear trend. And it has been a little bit drier, but that doesn't necessarily mean it will continue that way. One of the specific areas I wanted to show was that Grand Mesa division, which I'll show you is this the big one that covers Garfield, Mesa, Montrose, Delta counties, and has that -5%. So if I focus in on that division, what are the future projections for temperature and precipitation? So on the left is all of the model projections to the year 2050. How much warming are they expecting? So that zero line would be no warming, but all of them are showing just different magnitudes of warming. As you can see, there's quite a wide spread of warming. Regardless, all of them showing warming in all of the seasons or all of the months. If we look at the graph on the right, that's precipitation. And now you can see that uncertainty where there's a lot of models that show a wetter future and there's models that show a drier future. And some of the signals that pop out for the West Slope are that we're seeing more of the models showing drier in the late spring and into the early summer. But overall, we're still not sure what's going to happen with the future of precipitation. But what do the warmer temperatures mean? We do know that it's more likely that snowpack is going to peak early. and that peak is more likely to be below what we typically experienced from the 1971 to 2000 time period. It is likely that this is going to decrease our stream flow volume. Even in a wetter future, the warmer temperatures are going to decrease the efficiency of the system to make that snowpack into runoff and water supply. If we have precipitation that is much above average, that could help make up that deficit from the warmer temperatures impact. We're also seeing that there would be wetter soils in the spring because of the earlier melt, but that tends to mean we'll have drier soils in the summer. And the warmer falls, which have been pretty relentless over the past 20 years, could overall delay the start of those snowpack accumulations. I urge you to go to climatechange.colorado.state.edu because we have a whole bunch in there about the changes in climate that we've observed and what we can expect going into the future. And that is all I have. I'll stop there.
Excellent. And thank you, Becky. I have a correction from earlier. I said, look for the Q&A button on Zoom. We're actually using the chat feature today. My apologies. So look at the bottom of your ribbon for the chat feature to ask Becky questions. Note that you need to open that up and see that Retta has already posted for us the link to the climate change website that Becky has just referenced. Thank you, Becky, for that. And thank you, Retta, for bringing that information out there. Becky, can you see the chat and see those questions? We've got one from Sandy.
Any projections for extreme low temperatures? That's really good. That was one of the ones I included in a longer presentation, but cut out for this one, is that the trends that we've seen for the cold waves is what we've called them. For each division, we looked at, what are the coldest strings of temperatures you typically experience and how often do you experience it? And that we had a sharp decline from kind of the 1950s to the 1980s or 1970s. But since then, we've kind of increased the number of cold extremes that we've seen. And so we haven't had that significant decline in cold waves to match up with, like, we have a significant increase in heat waves in the summer. So the climate models do show that by the middle of the century, it is likely that we're going to have a few less cold waves, but at this point, they're not disappearing. Like, they are still here. They're not declining at a significant rate. So you can still expect that we're going to have those cold snaps in the winter. Similarly, we haven't really seen a clear trend everywhere of, when is the first freeze in the fall and when is the last freeze in the spring. We've had a lot of variability there, and that is also expected to continue into the near future.
Sounds like further challenges, Becky, for those of us who grow things, that we need plants that continue to be cold hardy, but also have to survive really hot temperatures.
Exactly.
Great question, Sandy. If there's other questions, please put them in the chat.
Yes. So we have, has any model validation been completed on the climate models cited? For example, how well did the models predict our actual experience starting 10 years ago? So we do address this in our Climate Change in Colorado report. And there's good news and bad news. The good news is that we have consistently followed some of the warming shown in the climate models, and that bad news that goes with it is that we are warming. The other, you can take this kind of as good news, is there are different scenarios of climate models. There's the worst case scenario, which is no actions are being taken to mitigate climate change, and we have very extreme warming. We have not followed that pathway. We've followed the more moderate pathway, which is we are taking some actions to mitigate climate change. And as long as we continue to take those actions, we're going to follow along with that middle range scenario, which is still warming, but not as significant warming as those worst case models. So not only have we followed it with our temperatures within the state of Colorado, but also when you model the future of greenhouse gas emissions, primarily CO2, that those have followed the projections from that middle scenario as well.
Becky, thank you so much. We all want to thank Becky for joining us today. If you've got further questions for Becky, you can email her at that link that she has showed right there. Becky, I'm going to ask you to stop sharing your screen.
Yep.
And I will tell you all that, as Retta put in the chat, there is a link now to the Colorado State University Ag Business Management website. And when you pull that up, I'll show you real quick here that you're going to get this website. Note that Becky's presentation, along with Steve's and Joe's, and the presentations for Thursday will also be placed here. And if you want to look at what we did last year, you just click on the link here and everything from 2023 will be there as well. So that information is in the chat. Thank you, Retta, for posting that in there. We'll now turn it over to Jenny again to introduce our next speaker. Jenny?
Thank you, Todd. Steve, if you can begin sharing your screen for us. I'll read a short bio about you, and we'll get started with our market outlook presentation. So Dr. Koontz is a professor in the Department of Agriculture and Resource Economics. His research interests are focused on commercial commodity agricultural markets of significance in Colorado. These industries include cattle and beef, feed grains, wheat, forage, and also dairy. His research examines market and price analysis tools, forecasting and modeling methods, and linkage of those tools with agribusiness and risk management. His research also includes long-term scholarly interests in industrial organization, econometric methods, and experimental economics. Thank you so much for your time and for being here today, Steve. I'll now give you the floor for some market outlook.
Thanks, Jenny. All right, let's do a little market outlook. From an overall ag standpoint, a lot of the markets look very strong. The agriculture GDP in the state of Colorado is excellent. So what about the future? We're talking much tighter cattle supplies very soon, but at the same time, we have some softening consumer demand and also some softening trade. We have very serious herd liquidation that's going on that hasn't showed much of a willingness to change. And from a forage standpoint, we're coming off of record tight stocks and record high prices, but we've had pretty good moisture in the West. So the quality issue remains there. From an overall economy standpoint, lots of folks have been talking about a recession for a long time, and this has not panned out. So I do think things are slowing down, but the chances for a soft landing look pretty strong. All right, what's the main thing going on in the cattle industry? It's if you go back to 2022, we had record high commercial beef production. Just substantial amounts of beef out there. And if you look at the prices that were going on in that time period, we also had fabulous prices. So we just had extraordinary demand for beef in 2022. 2023, the production has come off, and that number for 2024 is a forecast. But the dotted line for 2024 is not a forecast. That's the January number on the cow herd size. And we see we have a smaller beef cow herd now than we did at the bottom of the last cycle in 2014. So we have very tight production numbers coming. And I'm hesitant to forecast record high beef and cattle prices simply because we've already had them. Have they run their course? I do think we will have very strong prices going forward. If we don't have fed cattle prices in the second quarter of this year that start with a 2, they will be the case come fourth quarter. So we have very high fed cattle prices and then periodic very high prices likely in 2025. We're looking at at least 2 years of very tight beef supplies, possibly 3 years. And $2 fed cattle pretty easily with as cheap a corn as we're having translates into 500 and 600 pound calves that are $3 or better. Those are some just shockingly high prices. They're very high prices, and this is very likely what we're going to face for the next for this year, for next year, and the year after that. What's this coming from? It's all coming from the huge reductions in beef slaughter that are happening. You saw the beef cow numbers, they're lower. That's going to translate into tighter beef supplies. There's simply no way around that. Not only tighter beef supplies, it will also translate into much lower exports and likely higher imports. So the main thing going on is simply the reduction in beef supplies going forward. That's the main market driver going on. So let's dig into the details a little bit. We see that steer slaughter out of the fed slaughter is tighter. Well, what's the deal? Smaller numbers of cows. How have we maintained this super high beef production? We're sending heifers to town. The heifers are going into the meat system. They're not rebuilding the herd. And we're finally seeing in 2023 a bit of a fallback from what has been strong heifer slaughter through 2022 and 2021. So a little bit of a change there, but certainly no evidence of herd building yet. And if we look at beef cow slaughter, we're off from the very large beef cow slaughter in 2022, and we see the very strong cull slaughter that generally happens through the fall. Transition on over into the fed cattle sector. You would think we would be facing tighter and tighter numbers of animals on feed. That was very much the case last year through most of the year. And cattle on feed numbers actually picked up and were high going into 2024. What's the deal? We had very light, relative to the numbers of animals on feed, we had pretty light marketings the last half of last year. So what that does is that backs up the meat system a little bit. And I would expect there to be a real strong jump in fed cattle prices potentially once we get through these long fed cattle, but it's going to take probably well into the second quarter of the current year before that happens. Okay. Boxed beef cutout values, excellent, simply excellent in 2023 compared to 2022. Excellent compared to 2021 as well. So just excellent beef demand and creating those strong product prices. Is there any weakness in the beef price sector, in the beef cuts? And we are seeing some in some of the end meats in particular. You see the strong dip in round prices late in the fall, early in the winter of last year, and you see something similar going on with hamburger. So there's a bit of a backing up in prices at the meat sector, a little bit of a weakness there, and that's the first one we've seen. Slaughter steer prices, 5 market weighted average. This is the whole country. These are excellent prices for all of last year. A little bit of weakness at the tail end of the year. And like I said, it's going to take us into the second quarter before we turn the corner and are able to have some stronger fed cattle prices. How about the calves? This is one of my favorite graphs. This is, see that point right there at the very end? That's not very far from $3 a pound for 5 to 6 weight animals. We will have some $3 a pound calf prices, and we will have more than a few folks out there in the world that are interested in purchasing some bred heifers. So if you're interested in producing those things, I would think you'll have an excellent market. These are just fabulous calf prices. You would think with hamburger falling off in value that the cow prices would back off a little bit, and they haven't yet, but I would predict that would be the case at some point in time in 2024. We'll see that. So where's all this weakness coming from? This is your margin that your packer is making. So this is taking beef sales and byproduct value and subtracting from it, what does it cost to buy a fed animal? All right, so that's what they have left over. And what I can assure you is to run those big commercial plants, we're talking about cost of production that are in the range of $300 to $400 a head. $300 to $400 per 1,000 pounds. Some of your smaller processors are charging $900 to $1,000. So they have to do something that really offsets creates value for their margin. That's going to be a tough business to be in. But what we can see in 2023 is the packing industry was really strapped. They may have made money in June, and all of 2023, it's very likely they lost money. And they didn't make much money at the tail end of 2022. So we've had lots of months of packers losing money, and that doesn't bode well for stronger fed cattle prices. That's the main weakness in the system. So what's going on? Steel in a graphic from Cattle Facts here. If you add up all the packing capacity in the country, and then you split it over a 40-hour week, you get the blue bars. And if you take a look at the what do we have for animals to go through that system, you get the red line. What you see is prior to 2017, we had more packing capacity than animals. So packers were scrapping for animals. 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, there was way more animals than packing capacity. And COVID made that much worse. So that system finally got cleaned up. And now we have 2023, 2024, where we have a lot more packing capacity than animals. So the packing industry is in real dire straits, I believe, going forward for a couple of years. That's going to create uncertainty, volatility, and simply not, what was the comment earlier, blue skies and unicorns. It's not rainbows and unicorns going forward. There's some real issues in the supply chain that are not transparent yet. Okay. I talked about strong beef demand. Here's record high beef prices paid by the consumer. Absolute record high prices in 2023, very strong prices in 2022. So where's that coming from? What I have here for you is some information from the Federal Reserve, and it's disposable personal income. So disposable income is, let's subtract out taxes and debt payments, and real. So that means we've deflated it. So we're taking inflation out. And what we see is the tremendous stimulus spending following the pandemic. The pandemic right there, that shaded dark region, the recession that went along with the pandemic. So you had huge inflections of pushing of income out into the economy, and that money gets spent and respent and respent and respent. One individual's bills or another person's income. So money is not like other commodities. If you eat a hamburger, it's gone. Nobody else can eat it. You spend your money, that goes into somebody else's pocket and they can spend it. So this income, I believe, is part of the cause of the record high beef prices and the really strong beef demand that we've seen. And that will spend its way out over the next couple of years. And we'll have to see where demand lands and whether or not we're dealing with an economic slowdown. All right, I warned you, record high beef prices create weak exports. Here we have weak exports, the tail end of last year, and they're going to get weaker to come. And with record high beef prices, you're going to have stronger imports. Here are stronger imports happening, and they're going to get bigger. And we're going to get back to fighting over, should we participate in international trade of beef products? And for me, the answer is a very certain yes. On average, participating in international trade makes the beef industry $1 billion per year over the last 27 years. That's pretty much a moneymaker. Now, it doesn't make money every year, but it makes money in the long run. And I think we need to keep that in mind in dealing with political pressures. Okay, we're looking at the cow herd turning, eventual herd rebuilding, and we're just not seeing any evidence of that yet. That will be the case. We'll finally have more calves. We've had 3 hard years of liquidation, in part due to the drought we've seen in the southern plains, but we have no evidence of herd building yet. So what that means is that creates lots of opportunities for higher and higher prices. The drawback to that is supply chain issues, packers losing money for months on end, and also consumers, their willingness to spend those additional dollars. How much does that continue? The future, though, looks very bright for cow-calf producers. The national average barometer for cow-calf returns is not going to be record large in 2024, but it is going to be record large in 2025. So cow-calf producers stand to be very profitable for the next couple of years. Provided hay prices don't go crazy, which is where we're headed. Do your charts, look at your trend lines. I think making some smart purchases of LRP for a cow-calf producer is simply going to be a good thing to do. I don't think we can count on the market just moving higher and higher and higher. We're going to have some of this stuff, this volatility. We're going to have to learn to live with it and manage it better going forward. So that's what I've talked about. Tight numbers, no clear herd building, very bullish long term. But we've had very strong demand in recent years, in part due to income. And we're going to have less income going forward. We have higher interest costs. We have persistent inflation, and the stimulus money will run out. So let's be cautious, but I'm cautiously optimistic. Transitioning over to forage. I'm glad to see I didn't use any of the same drought maps. I'm interested in throwing the net a little wider. So we've seen lots of moisture over the country based on the short-term composite measures. And in particular, we've seen moisture in Colorado and in the wheat belt and in the northern plains, lots of places that grow grass to feed cattle. How about that longer-term drought composite index? The little bit of concerns for me, I'm worried about the corn belt, worried about corn prices. We'll have some drought concerns this year, I believe. And you see the onflow of that atmospheric river pushing moisture into the Rockies, into the Central Rockies. So lots of moisture being pushed in, and that's good for making hay the coming year. Speaking of hay, looking at our December report for hay stocks, not record tight. It was record tight last year, and 2022 was also very tight in 2012. We were expanding that a little bit, and then the forecasts for this coming May, with all that moisture, is a good bit of rebuilding of stocks. So we're looking at a good bit of rebuilding stocks in the future. That's good news for access to forage. Not necessarily good news if you're selling hay. Let's dig into the details of where those stocks are located, though. So where are hay stocks? They're where we have pasture that we can hay. And let's look at the changes that occurred last year. What we see is a modest growing of hay stocks, especially in our neighboring states. And I'm in particular interested in what do the hay acres look like? And then we're seeing a modest growth in those hay acres and the hay production, but not tremendous in terms of all of a sudden we're going to have a lot of production and swamp this market. So I think the outlook is good for increased production, increased availability, and the prices will be off some, but not tremendously. We'll be off from record high prices. How about what does the report tell us about new planted acres? Well, we're seeing more new planted acres, especially in neighboring states. And if you plant a field to forage, you have a tendency to want to harvest that for 3 years. It's not immediately plowed up and planted to something else. So the outlook is very much for expanding production into this coming year, especially with the weather that's stacking. All right. Let's look at all U.S. hay prices, and I want to point out to you in 2022, every last ton of hay in the country sold for almost always better than $230 a ton. That's just an insane price. It jumped at the end of 2021, and all of the crop year 2022 was better than $225 a ton. That's a very expensive hay market. And we have seen that market come down considerably moving into 2023 through the fall of that into early 2024. So we're seeing this market come off of record high prices, but still very strong. So stocks are expanding, but still tight. The West looks like it's going to hold firm in terms of prices. Really what kinds of additional acres? We're going to see some more additional acres. And we also see some quality issues, especially out west. I think all of the upside potential has been realized. Holding out for higher prices is not going to make sense. Very good quality hay is going to be up in the 200s, good hay in the 100s, and then lower quality hay is finally breaking into the low hundreds. And if you look at corn stalks and straw, it's finally down to where it's not astronomical anymore. So that's what I have for outlook. I'm happy to take questions and dig into some more details if anybody's interested.
Thank you very much, Steve. I always appreciate your presentations because I learn what cuts of meat I should be consuming, or maybe it's just because I'm hungry because it's lunchtime, but sounds like we need to eat more burgers, and I'm happy to do my part in supporting.
We're seeing a little bit of weakness there, but it's very bullish long term, very strong prices for the next 2 to 3 years. But you're dealing with consumers with less income than they've had. So there's a lot of moving parts, not a lot. There's basically 3 moving parts here that we need to keep an eye on. It's worth producers' time to invest learning about what does LRP mean and how do I make best use of that.
So if folks have any questions, go ahead and pop those in the chat. Steve, I have one that was sent to me that hopefully you can speak on. Are there any long-term issues or implications with the lack of herd building that you talked about that we're seeing?
It's going to be very tight. Folks that worry about market share and things like that, there'll be some serious issues. I think the pork and poultry industries are just licking their chops with respect to market availability. There will be opportunities for those other industries to put protein products in particular in restaurant chains and places like that. So, we're just looking at some pretty serious cutbacks, and lots of folks talk about moisture and focus on moisture. The Southern Plains and the dryness in the Southern Plains is going to make this as long of an issue as it is dry down there. That's where most of your cows are, and until there's a bit of a relocation of the cow herd, that's always going to be the case. I have expected to see cows move further east, maybe into the southeast a little bit more, but we haven't seen that yet.
Another question that came in for you, where would a semi-exotic like bison land in this current market?
That's an interesting question. Can you restate it? What was that? Semi-exotic?
Semi-exotic like bison.
Semi-exotics like bison. I think that creates market opportunities, especially for things that are reasonably close to beef. Beef is going to be the numbers are going to be tight. The production's going to be tight. There's going to be serious price pressures. This not only creates opportunities for pork and poultry, but for all other protein sources.
We also had a question for our lamb folks. What do you see happening with lamb prices?
Excellent. I actually had a slide on there. If you look at the production numbers on lamb cut back also. And if you look at some of the USDA forecasts, they're not that strong. So I do think the potential is for lamb to rally, but lamb is such a small market, the consumers that purchase lamb are the ones that purchase it on a regular basis. It's hard to capture new customers there. And if that industry is able to capture some new customers, I see some price opportunities there. But it's certainly not a given. That industry has had a tough row for a lot of years. Cutbacks in production, higher prices, but I'm not as bullish as I am on the beef cow side.
It doesn't seem like we have any other questions coming in. So Steve's contact information was up on the last slide that he had. If you guys have any additional questions, and it will be available in his presentation that we'll post on the website when we're done with this. Steve, I want to thank you again for coming and sharing some market outlook with us. We really appreciate it. And with that, we'll segue into our final speaker for this afternoon. We have Dr. Joe Brummer with us. Joe, if you wouldn't mind beginning to share your screen as well. So after working for Colorado State University for 29 years, Joe retired in 2023. So thank you for coming back from retirement for us, Joe. He worked at the Mountain Meadow Research Center in Gunnison for 12 years, conducting research and extension programs in the area of high elevation forage and livestock production. He then moved to main campus in Fort Collins in 2006, where he had a statewide responsibility in the area of forage production and management. He grew up in South Central Kansas on a dryland wheat and livestock operation. All three of his degrees are in range management with emphasis on grazing management. He gained his practical experience working with improved forages in both the sub-irrigated hay meadows in Nebraska Sandhills and the mountain hay meadows in western Colorado. Working with improved forages has allowed him to combine his interest in agronomy with pasture and livestock production. Thanks so much for joining us today, Joe. I'll turn it over to you now.
All right, thanks, appreciate that. All right, so today we're going to talk a little bit about irrigation and forage management, and maybe some things to think about as we get into these years when we have these droughts and some of those things that Becky was talking about. Here we go. So I always like to kind of start off and just kind of point out something when we're talking about forages, and especially when we look at compared to grain crops. Forage, you can almost always get some kind of an economic return, whereas on a grain crop, we can do some things when we have short water years, stress the plant, but when that plant gets to that flowering stage and starts to fill that grain, we have to have water, or you're going to have significant yield reductions. On a forage, if we get a plant that grows 2 foot tall out there, and it may not be economical to go out and actually hay that, but if you have some animals or you can lease some grazing to a neighbor, we can get some economic return off of that by putting the animal out there and letting them graze that forage off directly. So again, just kind of some things to think about when we're talking about forages versus grain crops. So first, I'm going to start talking about alfalfa a little bit, because it's when we talk about irrigation and forage production, alfalfa's called the queen of forages for a reason. There's hundreds of thousands of acres planted throughout the U.S. And I wanted to just kind of give you a little bit of background about alfalfa, and I think it's important to kind of understand this. It originated in a dry part of the world, parts of Iran, the Caucasus Mountains, other parts of Asia Minor there, and it's been cultivated and utilized by man for, over 6,000 years. There's remains of alfalfa that have been found in Iran. So the significance of all this is it comes from a very dry part of the world, but we, throw a lot of water at it, and it gets a bad name for that high water use. But it's actually a very drought tolerant plant. And anybody that's dealt with alfalfa for any length of time knows about the autotoxicity trait, where it produces a toxin, and you can't, plant alfalfa back on alfalfa. It, causes those seedlings to either die or to be non-productive, stunted, those types of things. So that's what I'm showing over here in this picture on the right is, where they've gone in, tilled up some alfalfa, planted alfalfa back on that, and there's just no plants really coming back in there. So this is kind of like a self-preservation mechanism, again, because it comes from a very dry part of the world. Again, it gets a bad name, and there's a lot of people that have look down on alfalfa because of its high water use. And to get, maximum production out of it, we have to throw a lot of water at it. And in parts of Colorado, that can mean, 36 inches a year, kind of depending on your location. But again, if you think about its drought tolerance and we throw a lot of water at it, that means we have a lot of flexibility in our management to maybe cut back on that water, but still maybe get at least a partial crop off of that alfalfa. So that's what we're going to kind of talk about. So I've used this slide for years. I think I pulled this out of the NRCS irrigation guide at some point for Colorado, but just kind of looking at different areas within the state and how much water alfalfa uses there in the middle. It's what we call consumptive use, or a lot of times we refer to this as ET, the evapotranspiration. So the water that the plant actually uptakes and, channels it through the system of the plant, as well as, what is on the leaves and evaporates, what's on the soil and evaporates. It causes kind of that cooling effect on the plant. So, here in Colorado, got Walden down there at the bottom, not a lot of alfalfa grown there, but, around 16 inches to as high as around, 38 inches out around that Rocky Ford region. Fruta, again, being up there at the top around 36 inches, again, a very dry part of the state. So, again, quite a range there in what it takes to grow alfalfa. Now, this would be irrigation plus what we call effective precipitation. So that would be total water use through the season. So back in the late 2000s, we had a graduate student that worked over here on the Front Range with Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District, did a study looking at, again, alfalfa water use and maybe some ways that we could cut back on that water use. So we sent that graduate student to the literature and to look up, how much water does alfalfa actually take? So he went and found a whole bunch of studies from all over the US. We have some from Dan Undersander down here in Wisconsin, back in the Midwest, Schmiel down in New Mexico, I think Bowder from Montana. So, a wide range of environments. And you can see that in the graph there with all those dots, surrounding that line down the middle. A lot of variability, but when we look at this kind of on average, it takes about 5.6 inches of water to grow a ton of alfalfa. And again, wide variability around that. But again, this is kind of on average. So keep that in the back of your mind. So alfalfa is, again, one of those crops, again, a forage that we harvest multiple times. And for the most part, kind of in general in Colorado, it's going to be a 3 or a 4 cut system, with the 4 cut system being probably the most common in the environments where alfalfa is grown. So this is the amount of water at ET it takes to produce a crop of alfalfa. So it's a cool season plant, and likes that spring as well as the cooler temperatures in that fall time period. So the water use efficiency, what we call amount of crop per drop of water, is highest in that first cutting as well as the fourth cutting of alfalfa. So what I've done here is I've drawn a little line equal to the height of 1 ton of alfalfa. So in that first and fourth cutting, it takes just a little over 3 inches of water per ton, whereas during those middle summer cuttings, when it's hotter, it's almost double that, to over 6 inches of water per ton of alfalfa. So again, keeping this in mind, this gives us some thoughts on, maybe how we can proportion that water out that we do have over the season. So the 2 basic strategies that most people will employ are what we call limited or deficit irrigation. So instead of, 36 inches of water, we're going to cut that back, and we're going to, kind of dole that out over the whole season. But we're not going to meet full ET, so we're not going to have that full yield potential. And but we're going to save some water. The plants are going to stay green. We're still going to get some growth. But again, the plant is going to be in stress all through the growing season. The other approach is what we call seasonal deficit or partial season irrigation. And this is the one that, our work here in Colorado, as well as, colleagues in California, Arizona, this is kind of what everybody's research is kind of pointing to. Whereas you take the water you have and you apply full irrigation for a period of time for part of the season, and then you just cut the water off and let the plants kind of go dormant or semi-dormant. So again, thinking back to that graph, that highest water use efficiency, especially in that springtime period. So that's a good time to irrigate alfalfa and then let it go dormant later in the season. That's going to improve our overall water use efficiency, the yield of alfalfa that we're going to get for that particular growing season. Now, again, alfalfa being a drought tolerant plant, what we've seen is there are few long-term impacts to the alfalfa stand. Actually, the alfalfa stands are healthier many times after they've gone through this stress. And again, we can save a significant amount of water and still maintain at least a partial crop of alfalfa. So again, this goes back to that study I had the graduate student work on over here on the Front Range. Again, Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District. And what we did is we had some fully irrigated plots, one where we stopped irrigation after the second harvest. So it was fully irrigated through the first harvest and through the second harvest. And then we tried to take that idea of, that first and fourth cuttings being the highest water use efficiency. So it was watered fully through the first harvest, let go dormant during the second and third, and then we put the water back on it late in the season to get that fourth crop off of fourth harvest. It seemed logical, but it really didn't work out quite as well as what we thought. And then the most severe treatment is where we just watered it through that first harvest and then we cut the water off. Now, generally, you need about a half a ton of dry matter per acre to be economically feasible to harvest. And so when you look at some of these, this stop after second, you're still going to get, based on stored soil moisture, what's left over, you're still going to get, a short third crop in that situation, or again, that stop after first, again, a short second crop off of that. But here, when you get down to around a half a ton, and here, 0.3, 0.2 tons per acre, it's not really economical to harvest that for hay. You still might be able to get some grazing off of that, but it's probably not economical to harvest for hay. Then you look up at the top, the fully irrigated, we put 24 inches of water on it. Again, about half of that for that stop after second on the spring and fall, and only 3.6 inches on that stop after first. So again, a significant amount of water savings, but again, you're going to give up some yield to do that. All right. So we actually ran this study for 4 years, but this is after 2 years of imposing those stress treatments, the deficit irrigation treatments on the alfalfa. We went in and looked at the number of plants, or the number of crowns per square foot. And when you look here at the most severe treatment, the most stress is where we had the most plants still surviving, 14.2 plants per square foot. This stop after, or the spring and fall, where we, watered it through the first, let it go dormant midsummer, and then brought the water back on, that actually stresses the plant. You bring that plant out of dormancy, uses stored carbohydrates, and it just weakens that plant going into the winter time period, and you have more winter kill of the plants. And again, look over here at the stop after second, again, the second highest plants per square foot density of plants out there. So again, alfalfa is very resilient, is able to withstand these stresses. What happens to the quality of the alfalfa? So this is the relative feed value, RFV, kind of based on the fiber content of the alfalfa. And I've circled on these different treatments when there was no water being applied. So when you stress the plant and it doesn't grow to its full potential, it doesn't get as mature, you're going to have a higher quality product, higher quality forage. So less fiber, more digestibility, typically has more crude protein in it, those types of things. So, but even though you're going to have this higher quality, it typically does not offset your loss in yield or production off of that. So, but it's again, it's kind of something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. It's higher quality, but you're not going to get near as much of it. So that was a study over here on the Front Range. We've also did some work on the West Slope. I'm just going to show you, we had 3 locations, one at Fruita at the research center there, one at Eckert on a farmer's field, and one down at Yellow Jacket at the research center there. Just going to show you some of the data from Fruita. So we threw out that treatment on the spring and fall irrigation. That decided that really wasn't going to work. and went with the stop after second and stop after first. So here is the first year of the study, 2013. Over here on the left in this picture, you can see the fully irrigated. This is that getting ready for the third cutting. This is stop after second here in the middle. You see it's shorter, thinner. It's just stressed, kind of has that bluish color to it. And then clear over here on the right of the photo, you can see the stop after first. Again, it's a little bit of green there, but not a lot of growth. The second year, again, similar thing, you know, the fully irrigated over here. In the middle, you've got the stop after second, stressed. Still going to get a fairly decent crop off of that. Then you look over here, that stop after first. So this has gone almost 2 months with no irrigation water on it. It's just nice and brown and crispy. And I still remember Calvin Pearson calling me on the phone and telling me that, Joe, I think your alfalfa's dead. And I told him, I said, well, that's part of what we wanted to see in this study. So here's the data. So again, you cut the water back, you're going to lose yield. I mean, there's just no ifs, ands, or buts about that. Okay, we did that 2 years in a row. Then the third year, we fully irrigated all of the plots. And if you look here on the right, this is the stop after first, the most severe treatment, had the highest total yield. Stop after second was intermediate. Then the lowest total yield was from the one that had been fully irrigated for the 3 years of the study. And so again, it shows that alfalfa is very resilient and it bounces back very quickly. Even though, you know, this is that photo where everything was nice and brown and crispy. Okay, so there's less weed pressure, there's less disease pressure on the alfalfa, and we had less alfalfa stem nematode impact on the alfalfa at this particular site. So again, a lot of potential advantages there. So when you're talking about alfalfa, again, I think you can use these, take advantage of these, you know, fully irrigate early on and cut the water off, let the plants go dormant. You can stop watering after that second cutting, keeping in mind that about 60% of total yield comes in the first 2 cuttings in a 4-cut system, and about 75% of total yield comes in the first 2 cuttings in a 3-cut system. Again, in the 4-cut, you're going to get a short third cutting, get a 3-cut system. Again, that last cutting, again, a short cutting in that, or you can graze the regrowth. Okay, or you can go, if you get cut off early with your water, just water in the spring, typically when you're going to have some water available through that first cutting, capitalize on those higher water use efficiencies in that first harvest, get that second small second cutting, or you can graze the regrowth. And again, there could be some potential quality incentives due to the less fiber, higher digestibility, higher protein of the alfalfa. All right, so that's alfalfa. Let's talk a little bit about perennial grasses, perennial cool season grasses. So again, here's that same chart, just looking at grasses over here on the left. And as a general rule, your perennial grasses use between 10 and 15% less water compared to alfalfa, but you also typically get less yield, 10 to 15, maybe 20% less yield in your grasses compared to what you can get out of alfalfa when it's fully irrigated. So just moving to grasses, you might be able to use less water. So let's think about, again, when a grass, a cool season grass, most grasses are only going to put on 1 round of stem reproductive growth a season. It's going to be that first growth in the spring. So that's going to be your highest yielding cutting, is that first cutting in the spring. So here's from Monte Vista. No matter where you're at, it's going to have that same bell-shaped curve there. So again, in the midsummer there, lots of water required, but you don't get a whole lot of yield coming off of that. But if you look at this first, watering it through that first cutting, first harvest, which is going to occur sometime in June, we're going to use about maybe 7 inches of water total. Again, this will be precipitation plus irrigation. So we can really, capitalize on stored soil moisture, early season water coming from snow melt, those types of things. Get that really good cutting. Again, just cut the water off like you would with alfalfa. Now, grasses, there's lots of different species out there, and they're all a little different. Some are a little more drought tolerant than others. So your common irrigated pasture grasses are represented by this line 1 here. So that would be like meadow brome, orchard grass, and tall fescue. Responds very well to high amounts of water. You get down here on the lower end, plants get stressed. They don't produce quite as well. But things like intermediate pubescent wheatgrass, crested wheatgrass, smooth brome is one that's got good drought tolerance, but it doesn't produce a lot when it doesn't have a lot of water. But again, it will stay with you and produce something when it's in this low water, limited water type of situation. And you look over here, again, when you have plenty of water, again, things like orchard grass, meadow brome do very well. Smooth brome does pretty well. So again, when you look at the grasses, what you might want to plant if you think you're going to be dealing with a lot of drought stressed, limited water situations, would be something like the intermediate wheatgrass, pubescent wheatgrass. Work in California has shown good responses to cutting the water off, just like I was talking with alfalfa, either after that first or second harvest, with tall fescue, smooth brome, and this hybrid wheatgrass called New High. So all of those work pretty well for this, limited irrigation, partial season irrigation scenario. So for those that might be at higher elevation, we've also done some work throughout the western Colorado there at these 6 different locations. Again, this would be what's called a mountain meadow type country, one cut type system. So there's not much, we just basically went with a total season fallow. Okay. So we didn't put any water on. And then we just compared that to a fully irrigated situation. And then when we didn't water at all, we got a little bit of forage, but on average, the yield was reduced about 70%. Okay. Then the next year, we went back to full irrigation on both of those. And again, grasses do not bounce back like alfalfa does. So we were still seeing about a 50% yield reduction compared to the fully irrigated plots. And so it takes time that, the vigor of the plants, the production potential, the number of tillers the plants are producing is just weakened. And it takes time for that plant to recover, whereas alfalfa can bounce back very quickly. Just like with the alfalfa, again, anytime you stress the plant, you're going to have higher protein and less fiber, so a higher quality forage quality, more nutrition for the animal. Again, here's where we went back to full irrigation on both plots. We actually had lower protein on the one that we had stressed the year before, but still had lower fiber, so higher digestibility. So a little bit higher forage quality, at least on a digestibility end of things, energy part on those grasses that we're trying to recover. So in summary, again, that 70% in that year when we withheld the water, but look at the range over here, 24 to 93%, depending on, soil type, location within the state, grass species, a whole number of different things go into this. Again, yields are still 50% below when we put full water back on it. Again, that range was very wide, 13 to 83%. But after 2 years of full irrigation on the ones that we had stressed, we were within about 7% of that one that had been fully irrigated clear through the project. So again, a range of about 0, some were completely recovered, to about 13% below that fully irrigated. So it's gonna take time for these grasses to recover. They're not gonna bounce back like the alfalfa. Again, forage quality higher in the year that we withheld the water. Again, the fiber was still lower, but which again indicates higher quality, but the protein was lower in the ones where we had stressed it the year before. So again, a lot of variability among the sites in the years, but you're going to expect pretty severe yield reductions that year that you fallow. It's going to still see pretty significant yield reductions in that second year when you're putting full water back on. And although you can expect higher quality, it's still not going to offset what you're losing in yield. Okay. So I just wanted to conclude here, just talk a little bit about annual forages. Again, I just picked Cortez as an example here. Amount of water, estimated water it would take to grow an alfalfa crop in Cortez, 37 inches, about 26 inches for a grass hay, cool season grass hay crop. And when we look at some of these like spring grains, your spring oats, spring barley, some of those, or winter wheat, winter triticale, some of those, again, only about 18 to 19 inches of total moisture or irrigation plus precipitation required to produce those. Now, that would be for cool season type annuals. Warm seasons are more water use efficient, things like millet, Sudan grass, sorghum Sudan grass, compared to the cool seasons, but often, they grow in that June, July, August time period when your soil moisture is potentially lower and when you might not have any irrigation water available. I mean, if you have some irrigation water available, these would be probably your better choices for that, that June, July, August time period. But kind of as a general, I think your cool season species would be better choices to take advantage of that winter moisture, early spring moisture that you get, and then spring runoff moisture. If you're going to have irrigation water, you're going to have it in the spring, probably not in that July, August time period. So things like, cereal rye and triticale, or your spring planted species like barley and oats would be your better choices. So in summary, again, partial season irrigation of alfalfa offers a lot of potential, I think, to conserve water while you maintain a partial hay crop, either, stop after second harvest or stop after first. Both have shown very good results and the ability of alfalfa to recover from those. Your perennial grasses, they will recover, but they're not as drought tolerant as the alfalfa, and you can still expect significant yield reductions in that year when you return to full irrigation. So it's just going to take time. Again, you can plant more drought tolerant grasses, perennial grasses like your intermediate pubescent wheatgrass, the new high hybrid wheatgrass, smooth brome, tall fescue, and some of those irrigated only through that first harvest. Take advantage of that high water use efficiency in that first harvest. Again, lower quality, but higher yield. Or you can go with some annuals. Annuals offer a lot of flexibility. You can rotate between forage and grain crops. You can decide not to plant if the water year looks really bad. You might just want to totally fallow the ground. Get a lot of different options there. Again, I think especially for hay, a lot of your cool season annuals may offer a better opportunity than some of the warm seasons because you may not have the water during that June, July, August time period when those warm season plants actually need a little bit of irrigation.
Thank you, Dr. Brummer. Appreciate so much. You're coming out of retirement to help us out today. That's been fantastic. Dr. Brummer and I have worked on a couple projects before. He's forgotten more than I'll ever know about forage. Joe, we don't have any questions in the chat. If someone does have a question for Dr. Brummer, throw that in the chat. Note that we've got an evaluation that Retta has just posted in the chat. So if you would help us out, and that helps us improve this presentation each year, fill out that link that Red has put in there for our evaluation. And I've just posted again where these presentations will be posted today. Click on that link and you can also see Dr. Brummer's presentation that he just gave. And Joe, did you have your contact information in that?
It was on the title slide, yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought. So folks, because we are running out of time and I don't see questions for Dr. Brummer, make sure that you click that link that we've posted there for the ABM website that will take you to his slide deck and you can ask questions of Joe there. Joe, thanks for taking our questions and for presenting today, again, coming out of retirement. I do see that Sandy has just posted, are recovery differences similar for heavy grazing pressure? too. Are you able to answer that, Joe?
Well, heavily grazed plants, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but heavily grazed plants are typically going to be weakened just because we've taken some of the carbohydrates. If you take them down too short, we take a lot of the carbohydrate storage away from those. And so recovery is going to be take longer. They're not going to be as vigorous in recovery. So it's a hard thing when you're on pastures, when you're limited on forage. We have a drought situation. You want to take it down pretty tight, but it's not really, you want to leave, 3+ inches of stubble if at all possible on those.
Thank you, Joe, for that. And Retta has posted a new link there in the chat, folks. Click on that for an article on range and helping answer that question. Well, I don't want to take anybody's time past 1 o'clock here, and we're just a moment or two past. Thanks again to Becky with our Colorado Climate Center, Dr. Koontz with the Department of Ag and Resource Economics, and Joe Brummer with our Crop Sciences Professor Emeritus and of our Crop Sciences Department at the College of Ag Sciences. Appreciate everybody also attending today. Don't forget the evaluation. We do want you to fill that out, please, and make sure that you join us on Thursday at 11:30 a.m. Same link. If you've registered for today, you have automatic access to Thursday's presentation as well. We'll cover another suite of information that will hopefully help you throughout not just 2024 and our next growing season, but beyond. Appreciate everybody being here. Again, fill out that evaluation, and we look forward to seeing you on Thursday. Take care, and look for this recording to be posted and sent out to you as well. Have a great day, and take care, everyone.